Now, here's the thing. I am firmly of the belief that we need to get out of Afghanistan. We need to get out of the Middle East, and we need to stop acting as the world police. There is no question about that to me. None. It's unequivocal. We must do that. Okay? Number one, these aren't our countries to dictate. So right now, we are in a situation where we have actually conscripted our U.S. commercial airliners to go in and pull out people in Afghanistan, to pull out our assets. My problem with that is that we didn't pull out our assets before we pulled out the military. You would think that if we wanted to pull out of somewhere, especially if we were going to pull out all of our troops, we would get the people in our embassy out, we would get our assets out, and we would get our collaborators out before we pulled out the military. This was a completely backwards operation. I don't know how else you slice that. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at what's happening. I'm sitting here looking at people hanging off of airplanes, and there they are. And the intelligence, the intelligence actually, there were 4 different scenarios that they predicted. One of them is that the Taliban would come in and take over Afghanistan very quickly. The consensus was around what they called option 3, which was the one where there would be a gradual takeover and they'd have plenty of time to get out. Now, it sounds like they got some bad intelligence because that happened so quick. I mean, it was like overnight, They moved in and they took over everything, We lost our Air Force base. Now we're here trying to get people out of the airport, and, this is on us. We need to take some ownership in this. And if Biden wanted to do the right thing, he'd stop pointing fingers and just say, listen, we had an intelligence breakdown. Things didn't happen the way that we thought they would. And we're in this predicament now. We're going to do everything we can to take care of these people and get them out. But we need to own the fact that there was a breakdown somewhere. We need to own that. And until somebody like Biden does, listen, this was at a almost 70% approval rating amongst Americans to get out of Afghanistan. I think now it's under like 40%, his job on it. Let's pull it up. And this is a scary thought for me as, a progressive American. Because, see, if Biden botches this stuff and his approval rating drops, then we're switching teams again. And I have a feeling that the right's going to be 3 times as emboldened as they were under Trump, and that we're going to be in for some serious trouble. I think that there's going to be, we're going to go back into a situation where we're seeing another renaissance for white supremacy, because it seems like that's what happened under Trump, I think that, again, it'll be some Republican that will be more than happy to shift all of our revenue, all the tax burden onto the middle and lower class and continue to relieve the upper class and corporations of their tax obligations while we flounder. And that's going to happen because Biden fucked up. The U.S. president's job approval rating fell below 50% for the first time, according to the NBC News poll, with just 25% approving of his handling of Afghanistan. That's what I'm talking about, folks. We went from almost 70% of America approving of getting out of Afghanistan to 25%. We tanked it, man. We thoroughly tanked it. There's so many, there are people, and I spoke about this the other day. I was watching a report where they were talking about one man who assisted the U.S. He was moving him and his family, every 3 hours to avoid persecution for having helped American forces. Okay? So that's what I'm saying, is this is where we're at. There are people dying en masse because of our failures. And this isn't a small one, it's huge. I'm truly hoping they can figure this out. I'm truly hoping that we can make moves to get people out of there, because guess what? The Taliban is still saying they want us out by the end of the month. The end of the month. We're so screwed. You know, Biden did a press conference today. I'd like to watch some of that. Yeah, I agree. He should have waited. We should have had our assets out of there before we ever did that. See, had he not pulled out to begin with, as hastily as he did, there'd be no reason to send 6,000 people back there. And it's totally redundant. It's ridiculous.
Most difficult airlifts in history, and the only country in the world capable of projecting this much power on the far side of the world with this degree of precision is the United States of America. We've already evacuated more than 18,000 people since July and approximately 13,000 since our military airlift began on August the 14th. Thousands more have been evacuated on private charter flights facilitated by the U.S. government. These numbers include American citizens and permanent residents, as well as their families. It includes SIV applicants and their families. Those Afghans who worked alongside us, served alongside of us, gone into combat with us, and provided invaluable assistance to us, such as translators and interpreters. The United States stands by its commitment that we've made to these people, and includes other vulnerable Afghans, such as women leaders and journalists. In fact, working in close coordination with the management of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, we have successfully evacuated all 204 of their employees in Afghanistan on U.S. military aircraft earlier this week. We've established the flow of flights, and we've increased the number of people we're moving out of the country.
Well, why didn't you do that to begin with? If he knew, even if he didn't know that this was going to happen, like, why wouldn't you prepare for the worst case scenario? When you're dealing with people's lives, why wouldn't you address worst case scenario? Like, they went in there and they had several different options, and the one that they thought was most probable sounds like it was the best case scenario. So why wouldn't they have gone and taken the extra measures to consider the worst case scenario? And now we're behind the 8 ball. What's that going to look like for our immigration system as we're trying to bring these people in? I think the boots on the ground had to have known. I mean, we were holding up their country for 20 years, and they weren't able to get a solid formed government. I mean, they weren't able to do it. We couldn't nation build. Instead, we ended up making deals with a bunch of drug dealers and drug traffickers and people in the military industrial complex to police the country.
Morning, to make sure we could process the arriving evacuees at their transit points. But our commander in Kabul has already given the order for outbound flights to resume. Even with the pause, We've moved out 5,700 evacuees yesterday, and we're working on a variety to verify that number of the Americans are still in country as we work on this, because don't have the exact number of people who are Americans are there, and those who may have come home to the United States. We want to get a strong number as to exactly how many people are there, how many American
How do we not
citizens,
know?
and where they are. Just
How do we not
yesterday,
know how many assets we have in that
among
country?
many Americans we evacuated, there were 169 Americans.
Are you telling me that, like, a company has to know how many employees they have somewhere, right? They have to be able to account for all their employees. Like, if I go work at anywhere, the major company, let's say I work for Bank of America, and I have to go work at one of their spots abroad because they at least for a long time they were affiliated with the Bank of Italy, right? So let's say I had to go work at one of their banks abroad. Are you going to tell me that that bank wouldn't know I was there and how many employees they had there? Like, this guy can't even tell us how many assets we have there? He doesn't even know? That concerns me.
We're also facilitating flights for our allies and our partners, and working in close operational coordination with NATO on this evacuation. For example, we provided Overwatch for the French convoy bringing hundreds of their people from the French embassy to the airport. These operations are going to continue over the coming days before we complete our drawdown. We're going to do everything that we can to provide safe evacuation for our Afghan allies, partners, and Afghans who might be targeted because of their association with the United States. But let me be clear. Any American
the audio
wants to come
sync's
home,
not great on this.
we will get you home. But make no mistake, this evacuation mission is dangerous. It involves risks to our armed forces, and it's being conducted under difficult circumstances. I cannot promise what the final outcome will be, or what it will be, that it will be without risk of loss.
Well, that's not very comforting.
But as Commander-in-Chief, I can assure you that I will mobilize every resource necessary. And as an American, I offer my gratitude to the brave men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces who are carrying out this mission. They're incredible. As we continue to work the logistics of evacuation, we're in constant contact with the Taliban, working to ensure civilians have safe passage to the airport. We are particularly focused on our...
Hold on. That safe passage to the airport, there's already been news reports about the Taliban stopping people and basically ripping up their papers and people disappearing. So this safe passage is bullshit. It's currently not happening. This is absolutely incorrect.
Engagements on making sure every American who wants to leave can get to the airport. Where we have been seeing challenges with Americans, for Americans, we have thus far been able to resolve them. We've made clear to
Here
the
he comes
Taliban
equivocating.
that any attack,
Here he comes equivocating.
on our forces or disruption of our operations at the airport will be met with swift and forceful response. We're also keeping a close watch on any potential terrorist threat at or around the airport, including from the ISIS affiliates in Afghanistan who were released from prison when the prisons were emptied. And because they are, by the way, and make everybody understand that the ISIS in Afghanistan have been the sworn enemy of the Taliban. I've said all along, we're going to retain a laser focus on our counterterrorism mission, working in close coordination with our allies and our partners, and all those who have an interest in ensuring stability in the region. Secretary Blinken is with me today, met this morning with our NATO allies in consultation about the way forward, so that Afghanistan cannot be used in the future as a terrorist base to attack the United States or our allies. For 20 years, Afghanistan has been a joint effort with our NATO allies. We went in together, and we're leaving together. And now we're working together to bring our people and our Afghan partners to safety.
It would have been nice if you did that before you pulled the troops out in the first place, asshole.
The British Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, Chancellor Merkel of
This
Germany,
is how you lose a re-election.
President Macron of France. We all agreed that we should convene, and we will convene the G7 meeting next week, a group of the world's
This is
leading
stressing me out. I got to take a dab on
so
this one.
Together, we can coordinate our mutual approach, our united approach on Afghanistan and moving forward. We are united with our closest partners to execute the mission at hand. We've also discussed the need to work with the international community to provide humanitarian assistance, such as food aid and medical care for refugees who have crossed into neighboring countries to escape the Taliban, and to bring international pressure on the Taliban with respect to the treatment of Afghan people overall, but including Afghan, particularly women and girls. The past week has been heartbreaking. We've seen gut-wrenching images of panicked people acting out of sheer desperation. You know, it's completely
Yeah, I got to
understandable.
smoke just to deal with this
They're
bullshit.
frightened. They're
Kidding me?
sad, uncertain what happens next. I don't think any one of us can see these pictures and not feel that pain on a human level.
Well,
Now we
yeah,
have
so
a
maybe you
mission-
should have thought about that
mission to
before you
complete
pulled the
Afghanistan.
military out prior to taking out your
It's an
assets.
incredibly difficult and dangerous operation for our military.
You fucking
We have almost
bozo.
6,000
Killed people.
of America's finest fighting men and women at the Kabul airport. And we're
It makes
putting
me
their
wonder what
lives
kind
on
of
the
deal was
line,
made with the
they're doing
Taliban.
it in a dangerous place to save other Americans,
'Cause there was
our
a deal
Afghan
struck.
allies, and citizens of our allies who went in with us. You know, I talk to our commanders on the ground there every single day, as I just did an hour or so ago. And I made it clear to them that we'll get them whatever they need to do the job. They're performing to the highest standard under extraordinarily difficult and dynamic circumstances. Our NATO allies are strongly standing with us, their troops keeping sentry alongside ours in Kabul, as is the case whenever I deploy our troops into harm's way. I take that responsibility seriously. I carry that burden every day, just as I did when I was vice president and my son was deployed to Iraq for a year. There'll be plenty of time to criticize and second guess when this operation is over. But now, I'm focused on getting this job done. I would ask every American to join me in praying for the women and men risking their lives on the ground in the service of our nation. As events evolve over the coming days, my team and I will continue to share the information and update the American people on exactly where things are.
Damn, that was needed.
We'll use every resource necessary to carry out the mission at hand and bring to safety American citizens and our Afghan allies. This is our focus now.
This is such a backwards way
And
of doing
when
things.
this is finished, we will complete our military withdrawal and finally bring to an end
It's like we got Commandant
20 years
Lassard
of
as our
American
president.
military action in Afghanistan. Thank you. May God bless you, our troops.
And
our
people wonder
diplomats,
why I
and all
wanted
those
Bernie.
serving in
Come
harm's
on.
way. And now I'll take questions. AP, Zeke Miller.
I think it's the guy from Reuters or PBS. He fucking rails him real quick.
America to live up to its promises. You promised to leave Afghanistan, but you also promised not to help to bring out those who helped America in its war effort. We've seen these heart-wrenching images at the Kabul airport of people trying to get there, say nothing of the people who can't get to that airport. You made the commitment to get American troops out, to get American citizens out. Will you make the same commitment to those who assisted in the American war effort over the last 20 years, number one? And then number two, what is your message to America's partners around the world who have criticized not the withdrawal, but the conduct of that withdrawal and made them question America's credibility on the world stage?
I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world. I've spoken with our NATO allies. We've spoken with NATO allies, the Secretary of State. Our national security advisor has been in contact with his counterparts throughout the world and our allies, as has the general, I keep calling him a general, but my Secretary.
Just one thing I thought about, too, that keeps coming back to me is I always find it interesting that we decided to pull out of Afghanistan around the same time the Sackler family got hung up on charges for their OxyContin production and sales. I wonder if there was any tie-in there, if maybe because of the opium resources we were pulling from Afghanistan, if because the need wasn't there, that's part of the reason we decided to go. Now, I don't know. Just my speculation. Seems like those two things kind of happen very closely together.
Defense. The fact of the matter is, I have not seen that. As a matter of fact, the exact opposite I've gotten. The exact opposite thing is we're acting with dispatch. We're acting, committing to what we said we would do. Look, let's put this thing in perspective here.
Good point, Mike. It did also coincide with the IPCC report coming out.
Point,
and Biden's watered down infrastructure agenda
for the express purpose
where he basically did a bunch of giveaways to major corporations. I think there's even a something in there about private industry being able to control toll roads. That's just horrible. We're going to privatize our highway structure? That's fucking scary to me. You know, not going to be able to get from one town to another without having to pay somebody? I digress.
Getting rid of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, as well as getting Osama bin Laden. And we did. Just imagine if that attack, if bin Laden had decided with al-Qaeda to launch an attack from Yemen, would we ever gone to Afghanistan? Would there ever be any reason we'd be in Afghanistan? Controlled by the Taliban? What is the national interest of the United States in that circumstance? We went and did the mission. You've known my position for a long, long time. It's time to end this war. The estimates of the cost of this war over the last 20 years range from a minimum of $1 trillion to a think tank at one of the universities saying $2 trillion. That's somewhere between $150 million a day and $300 million a day. The threat from terrorism has metastasized. There's a greater danger from ISIS and al-Qaeda and all these affiliates in other countries by far than there is from Afghanistan. And we're going to retain an over-the-horizon capability that if they were to come back to be able to take them out, surgically move. So this is where we should be.
So in other words, we're still feeding the military-industrial complex. We're just being more strategic about how we do it.
By the way, before
that just means they end up getting a lot more money and spend a lot less, all at our expense. I feel very comfortable about that, don't you?
And I told them all, every one of them knew and agreed with the decision I made.
I'm being facetious.
And jointly end our involvement in Afghanistan. The first part of your question was, I can't remember now.
Would you commit to the same commitment? Would you make the same commitment to bring out Afghans who assisted in the war effort?
Yes, we're making the same commitment. There's no one more important than bringing American citizens out. I acknowledge that. But they're equally important almost is all those SIVs we call them, who in fact helped us. They were translators. They went into battle with us. They were part of the operation. As well as we're also trying to get out as many NGOs, non-government organizations, women's organizations, et cetera. We're doing all we can. In the meantime, Secretary Blinken
thank you.
I am going to be working with our allies to see to it that we can bring international pressure on the Taliban they're looking to gain some legitimacy. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to maintain that country. And there's going to be harsh conditions, strong conditions we're going to apply.
Do it, Moni Macaroni.
On whether
it's a
they
good
get
time.
Help based on whether or not how and well they treat women and girls, how they treat their citizens. So this is just beginning on that score.
Stay past the 31st to make that happen, to bring all the Americans out, to bring those SIVs out.
I think we can get it done by then, but we're going to make that judgment as we go. Now, Justin
You're running out of time, buddy. The clock is ticking. You got 8 days. 7.
Mr. President, you just said that you would keep a laser focus on counterterrorism efforts and that you don't see as great of a threat of terrorism from Afghanistan as other parts of the world. But if you and your administration so badly misassessed how quickly the Taliban would sweep through Afghanistan, and we no longer have an embassy there from which to run intelligence operations, how can you at all be confident of your assessment of the risk of terrorism and the ability of the U.S. to conduct over-the-horizon missions to keep it in check. Can you tell Americans that they're safe and will remain safe from terror attacks in Afghanistan?
I think you're comparing apples and oranges. One question was whether or not the Afghan forces we trained up would stay and fight in their own civil war they had going on. No one, shouldn't say no one, the consensus was that it was highly unlikely that in 11 days they'd collapse and fall and the leader of Afghanistan would flee the country. That's a very different question than whether or not there is the ability to observe whether or not large groups of terrorists begin to accumulate in a particular area in Afghanistan to plot against the United States of America. That's why we retained an over-the-horizon capability to go in and do something about that if
I have an equitable disliking for both Biden and Trump.
But in the meantime, we know what's happened around the world. We know what's happening in terms of what's going on in other countries where there is a significant rise of terrorist organizations in the Middle East, in East Africa, and other places. And so the bottom line is we're dealing with those terrorist threats from other parts of the world and failed states without permanent military presence there. We have to do the same.
Oh, really?
In
So the
Afghanistan.
Netherlands have just started doing that last
Sir,
weekend.
just on that initial assessment, we learned over the last 24 hours that there was a dissent cable from the State Department
Sure.
saying that the Taliban would come faster through Afghanistan. Can you say why, after that cable was issued, the U.S. didn't do more to get Americans
Got
out?
all kinds of
All right. Are you guys ready for it? Let's see how he twists and turns right here to explain this shit. Oh my God, dude. Like, at some point you just own it. Like, just own it, man. Like, people are going to think you have a lot more integrity if you'll just own the shit.
cables, all kinds of advice. If you notice, they range from this group saying that they didn't say it'd fall when it did fall, but saying that it would fall, to others saying it wouldn't happen for a long time and they'd be able to sustain themselves through the end of the year. I made the decision. The buck stops with me. I took the consensus opinion. The consensus opinion was that, in fact, it would not occur, if it occurred, until later in the year. So it was my decision. Now, my next is Stephanie Ramos,
Biden
ABC.
on coke would scare the shit out of me.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 questions for you. The military has secured the airport, as you mentioned, but will you sign off on sending U.S. troops into Kabul to evacuate Americans who haven't been able to get to the airport safely?
We have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. We've made an agreement with the Taliban thus far. They've allowed them to go through. It's in their interest for them to go through.
Just likes the smell of women's hair.
So we know of no circumstance where American citizens are carrying an American passport or trying to get through to the airport. But we will do whatever needs to be done to see to it they get to the airport.
And one more, Mr. President. Last month, my colleague Martha Raddatz interviewed Abdul, an interpreter who was on the front lines with U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Overnight, we received a photo of Taliban militants coming to the door of his home, literally hunting him down. Thankfully, he was able to escape, but he is obviously still in mortal danger. What would be your message to Abdul, his wife, and his 3 young daughters?
We want you to be able to get to the airport. Contact us. We'll see whatever we can do to get you there. We've got to get you out. We are committed to deal with you, your wife, and your child to get all 3 of you out of Afghanistan. That's the commitment.
Thank you, sir.
Meredith Lee of PBS NewsHour.
Yeah, I don't want to watch all of this.
You mentioned just now using
This
every
is what I
resource
wanted to
available
touch
for
on, though.
evacuations. Why haven't you ordered the
If you guys
military
want
to
to watch the
expand
full
the security
thing,
perimeter around the
I would
Kabul
recommend
airport?
giving it a watch
Do you have
and
any
listening to
plans?
those answers. But here's the reason I just get sick of it, because he's twisting everything up. Like, it's typical politician speak, and I get so sick of that shit, man. Like, sometimes you just want some truth, you know? Give me the truth. That's all we're asking for.